"Get your hands off that badge! You don't belong here!" The words hit like a slap. The security guard jerks Commander Aisha Phillips's credentials from her chest, the lanyard snapping against her collarbone. Another guard seizes her arm, twisting it cruelly behind her back until her shoulder strains. Across the gangway, the carrier's officer watches with folded arms, a smug smile carved into his face. Phillips's jaw locks, her eyes blaze, not with panic, not with shame, but with a fury so controlled it's terrifying. "Escort the intruder off my ship!" the lead officer barks, savoring the command. He shoves her forward, his fingers grinding into her shoulder. He yanks her toward the unblinking security camera. "Smile for your permanent ban, sweetheart." Phillips doesn't flinch, doesn't break, doesn't give him the satisfaction of a single protest. Instead, her mind sharpens like steel. She memorizes every detail, their faces, their name tags, their insignias, each man marked in her memory, their arrogance inked like a death warrant. As they march her down the gangway, boots striking against metal, she walks with measured dignity. They think they've humiliated her. They think she's nothing. But deep down, Commander Aisha Phillips knows the truth. These men just signed their own fate, and they have no idea who they've provoked. "You're cleared for basic access. Captain Wells will determine inspection parameters." Phillips accepts her ID without a word, her face unreadable. The colossal silhouette of the Gerald R. Ford rises before her like a floating city. As she strides across the dock, the scrape of her heels echoes against steel. A pair of junior officers spot her. One points, whispers. Their smirks bloom into open amusement, then melt into dismissive shrugs. The gangway stretches ahead, empty. Protocol demands Captain Wells greet her. Instead, a young ensign jogs forward, uncertainty written across his face. "Ma'am, can I help you?" His gaze flicks to her badge, then slides away as if it burns. "I'm here for the scheduled reactor safety inspection. Captain Wells should be expecting me." The ensign shifts, restless, his hand brushing the radio at his belt. "There's no inspection on today's schedule. Captain's in a meeting." Phillips unlocks her phone with a swift swipe, turning the confirmation email toward him. "Scheduled 3 weeks ago. Reconfirmed yesterday." The ensign backs away, muttering into his radio. Phillips hears fragments. "Woman here, says inspection, not on the schedule." Woman here, not commander, not deputy director, just woman. 20 years in the Navy, 15 in nuclear systems, deputy director of naval reactor safety, and yet on this dock, she's treated like an intruder in her own house. The conference room feels deliberately claustrophobic, the kind of space meant to remind visitors of their place. Phillips sits alone at one end of the polished table, posture razor straight despite 30 minutes of silence. The door finally opens. Captain Harrison Wells enters with his executive officer and chief engineer Scott Wilson, their synchronized steps rehearsed, calculated. Wells's handshake is brief, perfunctory. "Commander Phillips." His voice acknowledges her rank, but not her authority. He sits without inviting her to do the same. "There seems to be a scheduling conflict with your visit." "No conflict exists, Captain." Phillips slides her tablet forward, documentation glowing. "This inspection was scheduled through proper channels, twice confirmed." Wilson leans in, folding his arms. "With respect, ma'am, we just completed maintenance last month. Another inspection disrupts operations." "Different protocols, different focus," Phillips counters. "Maintenance doesn't cover compliance, that's why I'm here." Wells and Wilson exchange a glance, a silent pact, a stall. "Perhaps next week," Wells offers with a thin smile. "We need time to prepare properly." "My schedule doesn't permit delays. My team is ready now." Her tone is level, unyielding. Wells's jaw twitches. "Commander, I must insist. The safety of this vessel is my responsibility, and nuclear compliance is mine." Phillips meets his stare without blinking. "Denying a scheduled inspection triggers automatic non-compliance protocols." The air chills. Wells forces another smile, voice sugar-coated with hostility. No one's denying anything. We're simply requesting a reasonable postponement. This is a nuclear carrier, not a schoolyard. Beneath the table, Wilson's phone lights up, reflection flashing against polished wood. Quiet maneuvers, whispered messages, the same old tactics she's faced her entire career. Phillips doesn't flinch. Her voice slices through the silence. I'll wait here while you confirm with Admiral Strauss that this inspection proceeds as scheduled. Phillips doesn't phrase her words as a request. She doesn't need to mention that Admiral Strauss expects her report by sundown. Her silence is its own weapon. Wells's jaw hardens. Very well, I'll make that call. As he rises, Phillips notes Wilson leaning toward the executive officer, their whispers clipped, their eyes flicking at her like knives before darting away. Outside, security personnel begin drifting into position. Hallways, stairwells, doorways, subtle but unmistakable, laying a net around her. Wells returns flanked by 2 armed security officers. His diplomatic mask is gone, replaced with the cold rigidity of command. The conference room door shuts with a thud that feels final. Commander Phillips, Wells says, voice heavy with false regret. I've spoken with command. There's a discrepancy with your authorization. Until it's verified, you are barred from all sensitive areas. Phillips doesn't move. Her spine remains straight, her face carved from stone, even as adrenaline sharpens her senses. What specific discrepancy, Captain? That's classified. Wells fires back too quickly. Admiral Strauss is unavailable. The security officers step closer. One lets his palm rest on his weapon, slow and deliberate. The other slides behind her chair, cutting off any exit. Intimidation, pure and unvarnished. Phillips reaches for her phone. I need to make a verification call. Not possible, Wells snaps. No unauthorized communications aboard a secure vessel. Your devices will be confiscated. The taller officer extends his hand. The other hovers inches from her shoulder. The message is clear. We own this space, not you. Phillips studies them with cool precision. This isn't about protocol. It's about power, humiliation, control. With calculated grace, she places her phone and tablet into the waiting hand. Her voice is even, razor-edged. I expect a receipt and their return in the same condition. Of course, Wells replies, his false courtesy dripping with satisfaction. He nods to the guards. Escort her off the ship. The officers close in. Their shoulders brush hers as they march her down the corridor, the suffocating nearness designed to shrink her presence. But Phillips walks tall. The hallway isn't empty. Sailors pause in their duties, eyes tracking the procession. Whispers flicker. She feels their stares, their curiosity, their judgment. This is theater, staged for maximum humiliation. At a junction, Commander Wilson waits. He doesn't bother hiding the smug twist of his lips as she passes. By the time they reach the gangway, a crowd has gathered. One officer tightens his grip on her arm, addressing the onlookers like a ringmaster in a circus. Let's make sure everyone remembers proper protocol for boarding a naval vessel. The second officer holds her credentials high, turning them for all to see. This badge might look official, but apparently it isn't sufficient for sensitive areas. Laughter ripples faintly at the edges of the crowd. Phillips's gaze stays forward, her expression unreadable, her silence louder than their mockery. No protest, no weakness. At the bottom of the gangway, the lead officer presses a visitor badge into her palm with exaggerated ceremony. You are restricted from re-entry without proper authorization, ma'am. Perhaps next time you'll follow the rules. Phillips closes her fingers around the badge. Her face betrays nothing, but inside, every name, every face, every insult has already been carved into memory. They think this is the end. They have no idea it's only the beginning. Phillips accepts the visitor badge without a word, fully aware of the eyes burning into her back. This is no accident. It's a choreographed humiliation. She walks with measured precision, each step controlled, refusing them the spectacle of haste or hesitation. She doesn't look back. She doesn't need to. Every face, every rank, every name tag is etched into her memory with surgical clarity. Her hand slips into her jacket pocket, fingers curling around a second phone. One never meant to appear on any manifest. Pentagon-level encryption, her lifeline. By the time she reaches her government-issued sedan, the tinted glass shields her from the crowd. Only then does she let the mask slip, exhaling hard, pulse thundering. She counts silently. 1, 2, 3. Numbers instead of rage. By 10, the tremor leaves her hands. By 11, she activates the satellite phone. She skips Strauss. This requires someone who has survived storms like this before. Vice Admiral Teresa Jackson. The voice answers on the second ring, calm but edged with iron. The first black woman to command a carrier strike group, Jackson knows exactly what Phillips is facing. They denied the inspection and removed me from the Ford, Phillips reports evenly, though her heart pounds. Captain Wells cited authorization discrepancies. I was escorted off by security. Names, Jackson demands, anger tightly reined. Wells? Wilson? Bryant? Security officers Ramirez and Taylor. Phillips rattles them off with unshakable precision. Document everything, Jackson orders. Times, quotes, witnesses. We'll handle this through channels. The reactor safety deadline is this week, Phillips presses. This isn't just about what happened to me. A long silence. Then Jackson's voice shifts, strategy taking shape. The USS Washington is docked at Pier 11. Captain Daniels commands her. He owes me a favor, and he has inspection clearance. Phillips narrows her eyes, calculating. They'll block me there, too. Not if you're aboard before they realize who you are. Jackson's tone is sharp steel wrapped in velvet. 30 minutes, be at Pier 11, and Aisha. Document everything. The Ford incident, every detail. The call ends. Phillips immediately builds her record. Timeline, quotes, the exact pressure of a hand on her arm, the mocking cadence of the words. She photographs the visitor badge, its subtle irregularities proof of procedural deviation. She encrypts and forwards the file to her government account and Jackson's secure channel. Timestamps will be her shield. On the drive, she calls her brother Michael, a civil rights attorney with a reputation for dismantling discrimination. She outlines the situation, crisp and factual. I need advice, not action, not yet. I'll handle this through military channels first. Document everything, Michael echoes, voice heavy. And Aisha, be careful. Men like that don't back down gracefully. She ends the call as Pier 11 comes into view. The USS Washington looms against the horizon, steel and shadow gleaming in the afternoon sun. Her humiliation is no longer just personal. It has hardened into resolve. This is no longer about one inspection or one carrier. This is about making sure no other black woman in uniform suffers the same calculated disrespect. Phillips studies her reflection in the rearview mirror, straightens her jacket, and steps into the light. On the Ford, Captain Wells's phone buzzes. The caller ID makes his stomach drop. Fleet Command. His problem hasn't disappeared. It's only begun. Captain Wells paces the length of his quarters, phone pressed hard against his ear. The call from Fleet Command was unexpected. The voice on the other end makes his gut twist. Admiral Garrison himself. What exactly happened with Commander Phillips today? Garrison's tone is clipped, stripped of any trace of camaraderie. Security concern with her credentials, Wells replies smoothly, rehearsed confidence coding every syllable. Standard protocol. We rescheduled her inspection. Did you personally verify these concerns with Admiral Strauss? Wells's stride falters. We attempted to reach him, but because Admiral Strauss just contacted me. Garrison's interruption lands like a hammer. and he seems very surprised that his deputy director was removed from your ship during a scheduled inspection. The practiced confidence cracks. Sir, Commander Wilson identified inconsistencies in... Do you know who else called me, Wells? Garrison cuts in. Vice Admiral Teresa Jackson. Does that name mean anything to you? The name lands like a physical blow. Everyone in the Navy knows Jackson, legendary, ruthless against incompetence, and utterly merciless toward discrimination. Sir, this wasn't about... Save it. Garrison's sigh carries thunder. You've created a situation. Commander Phillips is now aboard the USS Washington. She's conducting the inspection you denied. A submarine? Wells nearly drops the phone. That's not... She can't just... Apparently she can. Garrison's voice sharpens to a blade. Captain Daniels welcomed her aboard personally. And Wells, she's already uncovering safety violations that would have been caught on your ship. Wells sinks into his chair, sweat gathering at his collar, mind racing with consequences. Aboard the USS Washington, Commander Aisha Phillips moves through the submarine's reactor spaces with lethal efficiency. Every step radiates authority. Captain Daniels shadows her closely, ensuring his crew grants her absolute cooperation. The Ford's loss is our gain, Commander, Daniels says quietly. Your reputation precedes you. The cooling system modifications you designed saved lives on the Roosevelt last year. Phillips acknowledges the compliment with the smallest of nods, her eyes never leaving the console. Her gaze sharpens as she notices it, an irregularity, small but damning. This valve tolerance is outside safety parameters, she says, documenting with swift precision. Was this flagged before? Daniels leans in, frowning. No, I don't believe it has. Her voice cuts through the hum of machinery. This could affect multiple vessels, including the Ford. This is exactly why cross-vessel inspections matter. Daniels doesn't hesitate. He seizes his radio. Engineering team, reactor control, priority 1. He turns back to Phillips, urgency in his eyes. I want solutions before you leave this vessel. Back on the Ford, Wells summons Commander Wilson. The chief engineer's earlier bravado has evaporated. You told me her credentials were questionable, Wells hisses, voice low and venomous. Wilson shifts uneasily. I said they seemed unusual for her position. Her position? Wells repeats slowly, the implication like a blade hanging between them. Meanwhile, Phillips's encrypted satellite phone vibrates. A priority message from Admiral Strauss. Ford requesting emergency exemption from your inspection. Immediate response required. Phillips scrolls through her findings, each discrepancy documented with surgical detail. The valve issue isn't an immediate catastrophe, but left unchecked, it threatens long-term reactor integrity, fleet-wide. Beside her, Captain Daniels hovers, his engineering team already moving. For the first time today, Phillips feels control shifting firmly into her hands. The Ford tried to humiliate her. Now the truth is turning on them. Phillips's satellite phone buzzes again. This time, Admiral Strauss doesn't bother with greetings. Phillips, Wells is claiming you threatened to fabricate violations if he refused to reschedule. His voice is taut, thick with the weight of a situation spiraling out of control. He says you became combative when asked to follow security protocols. Phillips keeps her composure, though the accusation is absurd. Sir, I have detailed documentation of every interaction. Captain Daniels can confirm my conduct. Nothing in my behavior was unprofessional. I believe you, Strauss answers, voice steady. But Wells has allies at Fleet Command. He's filed a formal complaint. He's requesting exemption from your inspection cycle. On what grounds? Phillips presses, though she already knows. Conflict of interest. He's alleging you have a personal vendetta. Phillips's grip on her phone tightens, her knuckles whitening. Sir, the Ford requires inspection this cycle. The valve anomaly we identified aboard the Washington is almost certainly present on the Ford as well. Silence stretches across the line, broken only by Strauss's decisive tone. "I know. That's why I'm coming with you." Inside the USS Ford's secure briefing room, Wells addresses his senior staff. The air is thick with unease. Commander Wilson, once smug, now fidgets under the weight of the captain's glare. "Admiral Strauss is coming personally," Wells announces grimly. "With Phillips, we can explain the security concerns," Wilson offers, but his voice has lost its edge. Lieutenant Commander Bryant shifts uncomfortably. "Sir, about those concerns. I reviewed the credential logs. They were valid, completely in order." Wells's head snaps toward him, disbelief giving way to dawning horror. "Then why did you—" "Commander Wilson told me to stall her," Bryant blurts, refusing to meet Wilson's eyes. "She doesn't belong on this carrier," Wilson mutters, defensive now. "Women like her. They stir trouble just to prove points." The words hang like poison in the air. Wells studies him with fresh clarity. The man he trusted had dragged him into a career-ending scandal. His chief engineer wasn't protecting the ship. He was exposing it. Before Wells can respond, his phone rings. Admiral Garrison again. "Wells, it's worse." Garrison's voice is steel. "The valve discrepancy Phillips found on the Washington is confirmed. Engineering assessments suggest it's almost certainly present on the Ford. A critical safety issue you should have caught, if you hadn't obstructed her." Wells closes his eyes briefly, the implications crashing down. "We'll prepare for immediate inspection." Too late for that. Garrison cuts him off. Strauss is already inbound. He's bringing Phillips and an observer team. The line goes dead. By late afternoon, the Ford's flight deck gleams under the sun. Admiral Strauss stands tall, insignia flashing in the light. At his side is Commander Phillips, flanked by 4 inspectors, the observer team, impartial and unyielding. The message is unmistakable. The Navy itself is watching. Captain Wells marches forward with his senior officers, their formation textbook perfect, but discipline cannot mask the tension radiating from their bodies. Strauss's voice carries across the deck, sharp as a blade. "In 30 years of service, I have never had to personally escort an inspector onto a ship." Wells swallows hard. "A regrettable misunderstanding, Admiral." "Is that what we're calling it?" Strauss's eyes cut through him. He turns to Phillips. "Commander, proceed with your inspection as planned. Captain Daniels has already shared the valve discrepancy findings. I expect full cooperation from this crew." Phillips steps forward, clipboard steady in her hands, the observer team forming a shield of legitimacy around her. The humiliation of her removal is gone. Now she owns the deck. The Ford had tried to bury her. Now the Navy was forcing them to hand her the shovel. Strauss's voice is low but cuts like steel. "Fleet Command has received concerning reports about today's events. Security footage, witness statements, communications logs. They're under review as we speak." For the first time, Wells's composure falters. "Admiral, I can explain." "Save it for the inquiry board." Strauss doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. Authority drips from every syllable. "Commander Wilson, relieved of duty, effective immediately. Captain Wells, you're on administrative notice." At the Pentagon, Vice Admiral Teresa Jackson leans over the console, reviewing high-definition security footage with the Navy, Inspector General, and a Department of Defense Civil Rights Compliance officer. "Freeze it," Jackson orders. The frame captures the security officer's hand pressing into Phillips's shoulder, fingers digging in like a warning. "Enhance, frame by frame. I want every face identified, every unnecessary touch cataloged." The compliance officer shakes his head in disgust. "This isn't just misconduct, this is culture. Institutional rot." "Exactly," Jackson replies, her voice a calm blade masking fury. "Which is why this won't be swept under the rug." Back aboard the Ford, Phillips leads her inspection team with icy precision. They trace through the reactor systems and, exactly as she predicted, uncover the same valve discrepancy found on the Washington. "This should have been caught hours ago," she notes crisply for the official record. Engineers scramble, red-faced, to implement emergency corrections. A young engineer breaks ranks, approaching nervously. "Commander Phillips, I reported this valve problem to Commander Wilson last week. He told me I was being paranoid." Phillips locks eyes with him, steady and professional. "Your name for the record?" He gives it, relief breaking through his fear. "Others tried, too. Wilson shut us all down, said we were wasting his time." Phillips makes another note. "I'll speak to every one of you." Meanwhile, Wells's phone buzzes, his JAG contact. The message makes his blood run cold. They're pulling phone records. They know about the texts planning to block her. Evening settles over the carrier. The briefing room fills. Officers on one side, inspectors on the other. Strauss takes the head of the table. Phillips steps forward, poised, calm, not a hint of the humiliation she endured hours earlier. "We've identified 3 critical safety issues," she begins, schematics lighting up the display. "Valve discrepancies, backup cooling failures, and faulty radiation monitoring calibrations." She explains each with surgical clarity. Strauss scans the room. Most officers look shaken by the dangers described. Wells, however, wears the haunted expression of a man calculating the wreckage of his career. "These are minor technical issues being escalated," Wells blurts. His voice lands weak in the tense silence. Phillips turns, gaze steady. "Captain, you're not a nuclear system specialist. Allow me to explain why I recognize these failures immediately." She taps her tablet. A classified report appears, her name at the top. 3 years ago, I led the investigation into the USS Roosevelt cooling system failure. A meltdown narrowly avoided. 2 sailors dead. 7 hospitalized with radiation exposure. Gasps ripple across the room. The incident remained classified to prevent panic, but it led to the very inspection protocols you tried to obstruct today. Another tap. Photos of Phillips receiving the Navy Cross awarded in secrecy. She rolls back her sleeve, revealing faint scarring etched into her wrist. "I didn't just investigate. When remote overrides failed, I went in myself, manual override in a hot zone, knowing I might not come out. That is why I take a faulty valve seriously." The room is silent, reverent. Even Wells looks stunned. Strauss breaks it. What Commander Phillips omits is that she also designed the modifications now standard across the fleet, upgrades that have already prevented 3 separate disasters. Phillips closes her presentation. "My team will deliver complete documentation. Engineering crews must prioritize valve corrections immediately. Officers scatter to their duties." But Strauss holds Wells and his senior staff back. His eyes are cold, merciless. "There's something else you should know," Strauss says, nodding toward Phillips. She produces her true credentials: top clearance, embossed seals, authority beyond the Ford's chain of command. "Commander Phillips doesn't just serve as my deputy director," Strauss continues. "She chairs the Congressional Naval Safety Oversight Committee. Her clearance exceeds most in this room, including mine." Wells stares at the badge, the truth sinking in like ice water. His career hasn't just cracked, it's shattered. Phillips closes her report with quiet force. Combined with the deliberate obstruction of a nuclear safety inspection, this represents not just technical negligence, but a profound failure of leadership. Admiral Strauss doesn't soften the blow. His voice cuts across the chamber. "Captain Wells and Commander Wilson are reassigned pending full investigation. The valve discrepancies are corrected aboard the Ford, and fleet-wide inspections are already underway." A congressional representative leans forward. "Commander Phillips, do you assess this as personal discrimination or systemic?" Phillips holds the pause deliberately. When she answers, her words are surgical. "Both. The texts show personal bias from senior officers, but the speed with which improper orders were obeyed, the crew's silence in the face of misconduct, suggests deeper cultural rot. This wasn't just prejudice, It was institutional muscle memory. Meanwhile, at Naval Station Norfolk, Wells empties his quarters under armed supervision. His once busy phone now pings only with silence, colleagues ghosting him, allies erasing him. His lawyer's advice: no comments, no statements, no apologies. As Wells descends the gangway with his boxes, he finds cameras waiting. Reporters cluster at the perimeter, lenses trained on his every step. The same walk of shame he forced Phillips through, only this time he is the spectacle. Flashbulbs crack like gunfire. His fall is public, permanent. At the Pentagon, the committee debate intensifies. Phillips stands unflinching before the assembled brass, legislators, and compliance officers. Beyond discipline, she states, this demands a systemic review: how inspections are conducted, how discrimination complaints are dismissed, how bias endangers lives. Her brother Michael, now seated as a civil rights consultant, adds weight. Anti-discrimination policies mean nothing if ignored in practice. When a nuclear inspector can be sidelined based on bias, you're not just breaking policy, you're gambling with sailors' lives. The Secretary of the Navy exhales, the weight of inevitability sinking in. Commander Phillips, we'll need you to lead this review. With respect, sir, Phillips replies. Internal reviews protect institutions, not people. This must be independent. Vice Admiral Jackson nods sharply. She's right. Without outside oversight, this culture will reassert itself the moment attention fades. 3 outcomes are locked: disciplinary proceedings against Wells, Wilson, and complicit officers, fleet-wide reactor safety inspections, an independent commission on discrimination in safety oversight. By dusk, the story detonates across national media. CNN calls for comment. The Navy issues cautious statements, acknowledging procedural failures while scrubbing the word discrimination. But the truth leaks anyway. The Navy Times runs, nuclear safety inspector removed from carrier uncovers critical flaws on submarine. The Washington Post cuts sharper. Navy officers disciplined after blocking black female inspector who found safety violations. Wilson's lawyer releases a limp statement about standard security protocols. It collapses when 3 junior officers come forward with records proving he buried their safety concerns. Admiral Garrison, once a shield for the old guard, issues a public apology. Commander Phillips acted with professionalism and vigilance. The Navy failed her, and by extension, its sailors. That night, Phillips watches the coverage from her apartment. On speakerphone, Jackson's voice is steady, edged with weary experience. They're trying to make this just about the valves, technical errors, a paperwork failure. Phillips shakes her head, eyes on the headlines. No, they can't separate the violations from why they weren't found. Safety wasn't the only system broken on the Ford. Her encrypted phone buzzes. Strauss. Congressional hearing scheduled. They want you to testify. Phillips exhales, gaze hardening. The battle has left the carrier decks and entered the halls of power, and this time, every eye in the country will be watching. Captain Wells sits rigidly at the witness table. Captain Wells, a committee member begins, before Commander Phillips ever boarded your ship, did you know she was black? The chamber goes silent. Wells's lawyer leans in, whispering urgently, but Wells stiffens, deciding to speak. Yes, sir. Her name was flagged in a conversation with another captain. Flagged? The congressman presses, brows arched. Explain. Wells hesitates. His Adam's apple bobs. I was told she was difficult, that she had a chip on her shoulder. By whom? Captain Lawrence, USS Lincoln. A ripple moves through the committee dais. The chairwoman scribbles a sharp note, then looks up, her voice cutting like glass. Captain Wells, are you aware that Commander Phillips saved the USS Roosevelt from a potential nuclear disaster? That she personally risked radiation exposure to manually override failing systems? Wells swallows hard. I was not fully briefed on her record, yet you felt justified in obstructing her inspection, an inspection that uncovered critical safety failures aboard your carrier. Her tone is ice. The silence that follows burns hotter than any reprimand. Commander Wilson takes the chair next, but his confidence crumbles fast. When presented with his own texts dismissing Phillips as another diversity hire causing problems, his excuses collapse into defensive stammers. Phillips receives a discreet note from her brother Michael. 3 more officers have stepped forward. Testimonies tomorrow. The session closes with a thunderclap. The chairwoman's gavel strikes. In light of today's testimony and corroborating evidence from other vessels, this committee will recommend a fleet-wide overhaul of both inspection procedures and anti-discrimination enforcement. The next morning's headlines scream across the nation. Navy captains face discharge, over discrimination and safety failures, blocked inspection, nearly sparked nuclear incident Congress, exposes systemic bias in Navy safety protocols. By week's end, the Navy is forced to act. Formal charges, stripped commands, careers in flames, and Commander Aisha Phillips, the woman they tried to humiliate, stands at the center of a reckoning they never saw coming. The call came quietly, almost anticlimactic compared to the storm she had endured. The Secretary of the Navy himself had offered Aisha Phillips a role no one like her had ever held before, head of the entire naval reactor program. 6 months later, now Captain Aisha Phillips stands at the podium in the Naval War College auditorium. Her presence is calm yet commanding, every word carried on the air like a directive etched in steel. Behind her, a towering slide reads, Inspection Integrity Protocol, Fleet-Wide Implementation. The technical reforms were the easy part, she begins, her voice steady. Standardized procedures, anonymous reporting channels, mandatory documentation of inspection interactions. These are mechanisms. She clicks to the next slide. Cold, hard data. Bar graphs spike upward, exposing a truth the Navy can't ignore. In just 6 months, we've identified and corrected critical safety issues on 23 vessels. That's more than in the previous 2 years combined. What matters, she adds, scanning the sea of uniforms before her, is results. Vice Admiral Jackson, seated in the front row, gives a rare, approving nod. Beside him sits the Secretary of the Navy, hands folded, his attention fixed on her every word. But the cultural reforms, Phillips continues, have been harder. Training protocols, accountability measures, consequences for discrimination or obstruction. These cut deeper because they ask us to change who we are, not just what we do. The next slide flashes. Captain Daniels of the USS Washington, decorated for standing against bias during the Ford incident. We recognize those who prove that safety and respect are not competing values. They are inseparable. In Norfolk, the USS Gerald R. Ford readies for deployment. Its new commanding officer, Captain Diana Rodriguez, the first Latina to command a nuclear carrier, has already instituted her first policy. Every safety concern is logged, no matter the rank of the sailor raising it. On her engineering deck, the once dismissed junior officer, who first spotted the valve issue, now wears the insignia of chief engineer, his persistence finally rewarded. At the Pentagon, a new division buzzes with life, the Office of Inspection Integrity. Its diverse staff, chosen not just for technical brilliance but for ethical leadership, reviews safety reports in real time. No voice ignored again. Phillips's final slide appears. 4 faces, 3 black women, 1 Asian man. Officers who came forward after her testimony, risking their careers to expose the same systemic barriers. Their courage, Phillips says, her tone sharpening, proved this was never about one ship or one inspection. It was about an institution. Safety demands integrity. Integrity demands equality. When bias decides who inspects, who reports, who is believed, we don't just harm individuals. We endanger ships, we endanger sailors, we endanger the mission itself. The room erupts. A standing ovation sweeps the auditorium like a tide. For once, Applause feels less like celebration and more like reckoning. The Secretary of the Navy joins her at the podium, extending his hand. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to announce that Captain Aisha Phillips will lead our newly created Naval Reactor Safety Authority with full congressional oversight. Outside, the world is waiting. Media crews, photographers, the press already buzzing. But Phillips only sees one figure leaning against the columned wall, her brother, Michael, the civil rights lawyer who sharpened her resolve and helped craft the legal backbone of these reforms. He steps forward, pride shining in his eyes. "You did it, Aisha," he says quietly. "No," she corrects him, her voice softer now, but no less powerful. "We did." They're already calling it the Phillips Protocol in legal circles, Admiral Strauss tells her with pride. A year after the Ford incident, Captain Aisha Phillips stands tall on the observation deck of Naval Station Norfolk. Below, the USS Washington gleams in the harbor, preparing for deployment. Every system hums at peak efficiency, secured by the very inspection protocols she fought so hard to implement. Her satellite phone buzzes. Strauss again. "You don't have to do this, Aisha. No one would blame you for declining." Phillips gazes at the carrier, her reflection caught in the observation glass. "I know," she answers quietly. "But this isn't about him or me anymore. It's about closure." At a small coffee shop near the base, James Wells waits. No longer the proud commander of a nuclear carrier, he now wears the gray suit of a private contractor, corporate, muted, diminished. He fidgets with his coffee, rehearsing words he doesn't quite believe will be enough. Phillips enters with her usual precision, calm, professional, unshakable. Wells half rises, unsure whether to extend a hand. She spares him the gesture, taking her seat across from him without ceremony. "Thank you for meeting me," Wells begins, voice low, almost contrite. "I've spent the last year thinking about that day, and about what it revealed." Phillips remains silent, her dark eyes steady. "I told myself it was about procedures, but it wasn't," Wells confesses. He swallows hard, looking down at the table. "It was about assumptions. Biases I didn't even know I had. I never asked about your record or your expertise. I just saw a black woman who didn't belong on my ship." Phillips finishes his thought evenly. "And that was enough for you?" Wells nods, the admission bitter in his mouth. "If I'd allowed your inspection, those valve issues would have been fixed quietly. My career might still exist, but my arrogance nearly put lives at risk." "This was never about destroying your career, Captain Wells," Phillips replies firmly. "It was about ensuring safety isn't compromised by bias, conscious or not." Wells exhales, shoulders sagging. "I understand that now. At my new company, I'm working with diversity consultants, trying to help others avoid my mistakes." "Is that why you asked to meet?" Phillips asks. "To tell me you've changed?" "Partly," Wells admits. His eyes soften. "But also to thank you. My daughter, she's studying nuclear engineering at Annapolis. Because of the changes you've set in motion, she'll enter a Navy different from the one I knew. One where her competence will define her future, not her gender." For the first time, Phillips allows herself the faintest smile. That's something worth working for. As they part, Wells offers his hand again. This time, after a long pause, Phillips clasps it firmly, measured, respectful, not absolution but acknowledgement. Later, back in her office, Phillips reviews fresh fleet inspection reports. Safety violations are down, reporting is up, and quietly but unmistakably the face of leadership is changing. More women, more minorities, more voices finally being heard. Vice Admiral Jackson steps in, scanning the numbers. "Progress," he notes, "slow but real." "It's a start," Phillips agrees, "but systems only change when people change." "And people only change when they're forced to confront their assumptions," Jackson replies. "Like Wells finally did." Phillips closes the file. He's trying. That matters, even if it came too late for him. The Navy is stronger for it, and safer. That evening, Phillips walks the Norfolk waterfront, the salty wind brushing against her uniform. Carriers, destroyers, submarines glide in and out of port. Steel leviathans carrying thousands of lives, each one now safer because she refused to be silenced. She thinks of Wells's daughter, of the cadets at Annapolis, of the next generation who will face their own battles on more equal ground. Respect, she knows, was never about ceremony. It was about safety, effectiveness, integrity, and the courage to confront what others would rather ignore. She lifts her gaze toward the horizon as the sun dips behind the Atlantic. The Navy moves forward. The fight continues. And Aisha Phillips stands at its front, not just as an officer, but as a reminder that justice is never optional. If you felt the weight of Captain Phillips's journey, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Fate Tales. Here, we bring you powerful, true-to-life stories of justice, resilience, and change. Stories that challenge assumptions and celebrate strength. New episodes every week. Don't miss the next one.